Over the past year, Restaurant Brands International, that's the parent company of Tim Hortons and Burger King as well, they grew their revenue by 9.6%. That has beaten predictions. So let's take a look at what's happening with one of Canada's favorite coffee and donut brands, Tim Hortons. Let's head over to Susan Krashinsky Roberston, Globe and Mail reporter. Susan, welcome back to the show.
Hi there.
So, what's your take here on the last quarter for Tim Hortons? How are they doing?
Yeah, they're doing a little bit better. One of the things that's really interesting is that the company is really trying to adapt to the new lives that we're all living, right? I think we're all working, or not all of us, but many people are working from home a little more often, even as people go back to the office. And so, one of the things that's been interesting about Tim Hortons is it's been trying to adapt its business to cope with those changes. People obviously are still doing their morning coffee runs on the way to work. That's still very much a function of their business, and it's a big, big part of their business. That's never going to change. But, they're also trying to sell more food in the afternoon. They're trying to sell more cold beverages, try to sort of expand out their sales over the course of the day, because basically all of our traffic patterns, our movement patterns have changed so fundamentally over the last few years. And so the business of fast food is also changing.
And how's the brand doing? And I think that we've discussed this in the past. There's been, maybe in some Canadians' minds, a diminishing of the brand. And then, the Tim Hortons is trying to make sure, that they get their mojo back here. How is that brand doing right now?
The company says it's doing better. So they went through a big program that they called Back to Basics over the last couple of years, trying to sort of clean up their menu, return some quality to their food and beverages. So they invested some money in that to try to counter some of that perception that people had of declining quality at the restaurants. They did things like investing in various ingredients. I'm sure you remember there was like a big ad campaign about the fresh eggs in the breakfast sandwiches. That was a good example of that. They've been working really, really hard to try to turn around that image. And I think to some extent it's worked. They've certainly seen sales improving quite significantly at their locations. But at the same time, the brand has taken a hit because, as we've spoken about before, they have had some clashes with some of their franchisees. And so at the same time that business is improving, there are some dissident voices who've been raising concerns about Tim Hortons as well. So I think it's a bit of a dual tale there.
Susan, right on cue, by the way, as you mentioned the franchise owners, I get a text message from a listener listening to this interview, and they write this: ask the franchise owners how happy they are with shrinking margins. So I guess, there are two sides to this.
Absolutely, yeah. And in February, the company actually disclosed that franchisee profitability had indeed fallen. That's something the franchisees have been complaining about. So back in 2018, the average Tim Hortons location made in 2018, they made $320,000 per year, and that fell last year to $220,000. It's a pretty big drop. So the company has acknowledged profitability has gone down, and that's something that they need to turn around. There is a group of franchisees that have formed an independent association, basically saying they need more change at this company to reverse that. And a lot of what's going on there is the same conversation that all of us are having, frankly, about the cost of food. So just like all of us are wondering whose fault is it, that the prices are so much higher at the grocery store? Is it the retailer's fault? Is it the manufacturers of the food? Is it somewhere else down the line? Is it the war in Ukraine? There's a similar argument going on between Tim Hortons and its franchisees. So the company says, actually, costs on our end are going up as well, and we're not even passing on all those higher costs to franchisees. But franchisees are saying, well, the stuff coming in the back door, it's way more expensive, and that's hurting our profits. So there is a little bit of back and forth there about inflation and, who should bear the burden of that. So, costs are going up for everybody. But one thing that we do know is that there is some tension between some of those franchisees and that parent company. But the parent company has said, this is something we recognize as a problem and we need to turn it around.
with Susan Krashinsky Roberston from the Globe and Mail talking about Tim Hortons. They just released their most recent earnings. Susan, I just did a road trip, and I kid you not, this happened on the road trip. I'm driving from Montreal to Toronto, needed to stop and charge, so I stop at the supercharger, and the supercharger is right in front of a Tim Hortons and a McDonald's. They're both right in front. And my girlfriend wants Tim Hortons and I want McDonald's. So we part ways and go get our own thing at the various shops, right? And then we come back to the car. And, you were mentioning the eggs before and the change and the switch to better quality ingredients. And you know what? I looked at her breakfast and I was jealous. And it was because they had it looked better. It looked like the lettuce was nicer. It looked than what I remember, right? So that is something that's happening.
I'm sure they'd be very happy to hear you say that. That's something that they've been working very hard on. And I know, that there has been so much noise. I mean, look, this is a bit of an unusual brand, right? Tim Hortons is kind of one of those brands, even though there was a lot of high profile news around their purchase by this Brazilian investment firm back in 2013. This is sort of seen as this Canadiana brand. And so people have a different kind of attachment to it than they do to other brands. They have, stronger feelings in a lot of ways than they do about the average fast food chain. And so in some ways, Tim Hortons, that's a blessing and a curse for them, in the sense that there is a lot of sentimentality, a lot of nostalgia, a lot of sort of brand love in Canada for the brand, but also Canadians are quite critical of it. Any change they see, any perceived decline in quality, anything that they do, even any partial ownership by foreign investment firms, there's eagle eyes on this brand in Canada. And so it's kind of an interesting marketing challenge for them. You say that, you perceive that improvement in quality, and I think that that's something that they've been working hard to convey. But there's also a lot of skepticism out in the market because people demand a lot from this brand.
You couldn't be more right on that, Susan. I don't know if do you know J.J. McCullough? He's a columnist for the Washington Post. He's in Canada. He's a Canadian columnist for the Washington Post. I'm not familiar with his work. Okay, well, he did a poll on his Twitter. Okay, this is 2 days ago. Very simple question. Do you like Tim Hortons? Okay, Twitter poll. He got 7,500 responses. That's a lot of people to respond. And it was yes, 49.6, no, 50.4. That's Quebec referendum level of tightness. You know what I mean? And it goes to your point, right? This is a brand that kind of divides in a sense, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason why they have talked about working with their franchisees, because a lot of the perception of this brand, understandably, it's true for every single restaurant brand out there, is that, that is franchised, is that a lot of the perceptions of this brand are down to the experience you have at your local location. And a lot of that is down to the quality of the franchisee. And if that franchisee is making money and they're happy and they're investing in their restaurant, that experience is going to be better. This is something that the executives at the company have said. We want franchisees to feel that they can invest in this business, that they can, be working hard to make it as good as it can be. And, the best way to do that is to show them that they're going to make a healthy profit on this business that they've invested so much in. And so, it's an interesting balancing act because you have to make sure that every single local level interaction is doing the brand work for this huge organization. And that means the involvement and the buy-in of all of these local franchisees. So it's a very big brand. It's a national brand. It's a brand that's going global. In a very aggressive way, but in so many ways, it's also a very local brand. And, those franchisees have to be bought in for it to succeed.
Susan, if only you could see my text line right now. People are passionate about their Timmies. Thanks so much for coming on this morning.